Hello and welcome to the sixth lesson in our Macbeth GCSE revision series. If you're sitting the GCSE exam this year, next year, the year after, and you're just looking for some sort of a channel that will help you with characters, with themes, key quotes, model answers, model paragraphs, context, this is a place for you. If you feel like you understand Malcolm well, that's today's video. I still advise you to look at this as a revision thing. And who knows, maybe a teacher that's been doing this for over a decade might have a few ideas that you haven't thought about, having read this text about 100 times myself and still getting new things out of it pretty much every time I read it. In the previous weeks, the previous 5 weeks, we have been looking at the character of Macbeth, the character of Lady Macbeth, Macduff, the witches. Last week, we looked at the theme of good versus evil. Today, we're going to actually step back based on a request from one of my students to look at Malcolm as a character. And honestly, I feel a bit ashamed that I didn't put Malcolm in originally, because Malcolm is a character that definitely could come up. And so if you don't know much about Malcolm, then you definitely need to be watching this video or watching other study guides and things to help you. If you haven't already got like a pen and paper, or grab some screenshots as I do this, or make some notes, type whatever, make sure you're getting some notes basically from what I'm doing here as well for building your ideas on Malcolm. So Malcolm, I'll be totally honest, I don't know if this actually is Malcolm. I just put in Malcolm aesthetic image and this is what came up. Could be Macbeth in a TV show version or a movie. I have no idea. Anyway, the point is for today, this is Malcolm. And I thought it was a kind of cool image. He is a character that represents wisdom. He is betrayed, obviously, very, very badly. He has his father killed brutally while he's literally sleeping in the other room. And then he has to run to England, to flee to England. His brother, Donalbain, flees to Ireland. So the princes who should become the next kings are wise enough to know that there's daggers in men's smiles. That's a quote that I think was from Donalbain rather than Malcolm, but to show their intelligence. They don't believe that the guards killed their dad, so they run away. And obviously that would be really hard for Malcolm, because he literally has the rule of primogeniture, or the law of primogeniture, which means that as the firstborn son of Duncan, he should be named king right now. But he knows that something is rotten in Denmark. But technically that's Hamlet. But anyway, redemption. He represents redemption, and he is a redemption arc as well. So he can't defend his father. Obviously, he didn't know that his father was going to be killed, in fairness, but he can avenge his father. And so even though he isn't the one that kills Macbeth, it's Macduff that does that, he still is redeemed through that action, redeemed through his bravery in leading the Scottish army, even though it's 10,000 English men, to beat Macbeth. He's a very interesting character because he does have deceptive qualities, but unlike the witches and Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and others that deceive, look like the innocent flower but be the serpent under it, false face must hide what the false heart doth know, all that good stuff. He uses deception in a positive way. He deceives only because he needs to as a means of survival. And he actually shows more wisdom than his father in being able to deceive the deceiver, right? So that's really interesting. When we'll talk about that more as we go into some quotes. He is young and naive. I don't know exactly how old Malcolm's supposed to be, but I imagine him being younger than this picture would say. I would imagine him being like 16 to 21, sort of a young adult, young man, just a boy really. And yet he has the weight of Scotland on his shoulders. But he is very humble. He doesn't flex and be like, yeah, I'm going to be the king and I'm great and all this. He doesn't do that at all. He actually speaks to Macduff and says, look, I need guidance, I need wisdom, I need your help. So that shows that he's a great king as well. The fact that he understands what he's good at, he understands what he's not so good at. And finally, he represents, I suppose you could say, a restoration of the divine right of kings and a restoration of the chain of being. It'd be great if I could type today. Sorry about that. So he's those things. He restores the divine right of kings because he is ultimately who God would want on the throne next after his father, because of this law of primogeniture, which I don't think I explained that. Basically, that's the firstborn child takes the throne. And this law of primogeniture or rule of primogeniture is still true today, by the way. So when Queen Elizabeth II passes away, whenever that is, Prince Charles, Prince Charles, being her oldest child, would become the next king. Now, there's a chance that Charles, because Charles is already a slightly older guy now, he might then what's called abdicate his responsibility as king and give it to his firstborn son, which is William, right? Prince William. So it might be King Charles next, or it might be King William next and Queen Kate, not sure. Anyway, so this whole thing is still true even to this day in monarchies like in England. Okay, so Malcolm, let's start with, I have none. The king becoming graces as justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, lowliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude. I have no relish of them, but abound in the division of each several crime, acting in it many ways. Nay, had I power, I should pour the sweet milk of concord into hell, uproar the universal peace, confound all unity on earth. Macduff says, "Oh, Scotland, Scotland, if such a one as me be fit to govern, speak. I am as I have spoken." Fit to govern? No, not to live. Okay, longer extract to start with. I've got some shorter bits after that I want to go through. But the reason that I like this one first is because this one shows Malcolm's intelligence. It shows his ability to deceive people for a good reason, to protect himself. Even Macduff, who obviously Macduff ends up being his closest ally, but he doesn't know that. So when he says this long list of virtues that a king should have, there's kind of an irony here. It's ironic because it's like he's saying, I have none of these qualities, but we get the sense that maybe he has some of them, because otherwise, why would he know about all of them, right? So straight away, you've got the kind of irony that he pretends that he doesn't have any good qualities to be a king. And then he says, you know, if I had power, I should pour the sweet milk of concord into hell. So this is imagery of death and destruction. It's interesting that it's milk again, because obviously that kind of links to Lady Macbeth when she talks about like, take my milk for gall. And she says about how Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness. So we've got these images of destruction through something that's normally good. Milk is normally nurturing. But he's basically, Malcolm is saying here, I would destroy Scotland if I was in charge. I'd maybe turn it into a fiery hellscape, like in this picture here. Just love that picture. Anyway, so then Macduff laments, "Oh, Scotland, Scotland, if such a one as me be fit to govern, speak, I am as I've spoken." I just love this line, fit to govern, no, not to live. So Macduff is fully deceived by Malcolm. He literally believes that Malcolm is this bad person that he pretends to be. And the reason that he does this to Macduff is to test him. So he deceives Macduff to test him, to make sure that Macduff is here for the right reasons. Because think of it this way, if Macbeth had sent Macduff to go and capture Malcolm, then Macduff saying these things to Malcolm could be just to trick Malcolm to come back to Scotland to get his head cut off, right, or to be executed. Whereas if Malcolm can deceive Macduff and say something so evil to Macduff that Macduff actually shows that he's loyal to Scotland and says, you know what, you actually are not the right king for Scotland, then that proves that Malcolm can trust Macduff, because Macduff would never say this to Malcolm if Macduff's motive was to take Malcolm back to Scotland to be killed, right? If he was trying to get Malcolm back to be killed, nothing that Malcolm would say could change Macduff's mind of, no, just come back, be king. because he's trying to deceive him, right? So this shows Malcolm's wisdom. He's very wise. He doesn't trust anyone very easily. And that also then shows how he is on what's called a growth arc as well. Maybe he's partly redemption arc and partly growth arc. So the growth in him is the fact that he has learned from his father. He doesn't trust men easily. He takes his time. Even when someone appears to be good, he doesn't just believe them. Okay, Malcolm also shows himself to be a really good king when he brings back the 10,000 English men. So Seward is like a not British, or an English nobleman. And he comes to Scotland with Malcolm and Macduff and everyone with 10,000 English soldiers in order to help Malcolm become the Scottish king, right? Now you might be sort of saying, well, why does this matter? Here's why. Malcolm is meant to create this unity between England and Scotland. Think about the time that the play was written. You had James I, who was also James VI of Scotland, as the king in England. And the English did not like having a Scottish king. They hated having a Scottish king. And it's easy to sort of say, oh, well, you know, that's a bit, you know, why do they care if he's Scottish or English or something else? Fair enough. But think of it this way. At the moment, Queen Elizabeth II is British/English, right? She represents the Commonwealth. Imagine if through a fight or an invasion or something like that, instead of it being Prince Charles becoming King Charles or Prince William becoming King William, you had someone from Ireland, let's say, randomly, like overthrow England and become an Irish king on an English throne, right? I think even today there'd be controversy about that. But what Shakespeare is trying to do here is unite Scotland and England in the play and say, look, Scotland and England are like brothers or cousins. It's okay to have a Scottish king. So that's what we call propaganda. So there's like this propaganda in Macbeth to try and make it that the English feel less bad about having a Scottish king. And that's why this is important. It's also important because for the English to give Malcolm 10,000 men shows a lot of trust. 10,000 men cost a lot of money, and that's a lot of death to send home to English families if they fail, right? So it shows their trust in Malcolm and their belief that Malcolm is the right king, who, as I said earlier, has the law of primogeniture. All right, so then we got Malcolm talking to Macduff. This is after Macduff has just found out his whole family have been killed. So Malcolm says, be this the whetstone of your sword, let grief convert to anger, blunt not the heart, enrage it. So this image here of the whetstone of your sword, I wish I'd got an image of a whetstone actually, because I think that would help. You know what? I can do that. It's not that difficult to get a quick image. So a whetstone, hopefully there'll be a better picture than that. I mean, these pictures are okay, I suppose. Yeah, okay, fine. So, you know, a whetstone can be in different shapes and sizes, but effectively it's something that you sharpen a knife or a sword on the edge of. So that's the image. You know, let me just copy this in. That's the image that we're trying to go for here. And cool, there we go. And so he's using imagery to try and like motivate Macduff, to guide Macduff. And again, this shows him to be a good king because he's trying to say, look, Macduff, you know, it sucks that your wife and kids have been killed, but let's use that in a positive way. So again, it shows Malcolm to be like this really strong leader, that he's guiding his men, and he is trying to use the resources available to him. Okay, Malcolm then says, you may deserve of him through me and wisdom to offer up a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry God. So again, this just quickly shows his wisdom. This is what he says to Macduff at the beginning of Act 4, Scene 3. He literally is like, look, I'm not going to trust you, Macduff, until I know for sure I can, because you might be offering me up as a poor, weak, innocent lamb to an angry God. That imagery is obviously he's the innocent lamb and the angry God is Macbeth. Yeah. So again, wisdom. So then we have Malcolm's relationship to Macduff, and I think that's really important to consider. So Malcolm, also, like I said, is like this young, naive guy. So he says, "'Tis his main hope, for where there is advantage to be given, both more or less have given him the revolt, and none serve with him, but constrained things whose hearts are absent too." So this bit here, Malcolm could be showing a little bit of naivety. He's basically saying, look, no one is serving Macbeth now, except for those whose hearts are absent. They're doing it because they have to do it, not because they want to do it. Now, that's mostly probably true, but the naivety comes in that Malcolm is then being like, look, we're going to win this war, this battle. We don't have to do much to win it. That shows his inexperience as a king and his inexperience as a leader. Remember, he's possibly only like 16 years old right now. So what does he know about leading a Scottish army and overthrowing a king, right? Macduff then is like a father figure to him. So he says, let us put on industrious soldiership. So industrious soldiership is basically, let's work hard as soldiers. Like let's give them a good fight, right? So Macduff becomes like Malcolm's father figure. Malcolm has lost his true father, obviously, his father as in Duncan, but now Macduff steps in to be like a father figure to him. Now that's again a slightly less usual point. So if you do have to talk about Malcolm, you could talk about his wisdom, you could talk about how he uses deception in a positive way. I think those are both great points. You can also talk about how Malcolm is young and naive, and therefore Macduff steps in as a father figure to help lead him. So, you know, this, you can always imagine this being a conversation between like a teenager and the teenager's dad. So the teenager's there like, come on, let's go, let's do this. And the dad's like, wait a second, we need to do this, we need to make sure we're ready. Maybe your own dads or mums or parents, guardians, whatever, have had that conversation with you before. I know my parents used to talk to me like that when I was a teenager, because I always wanted to get out there and do it. They were always like, wait, have you thought this through? What are we doing? So the industrious soldiership is that exact thing. He's trying to calm Malcolm down and say, look, we need to fight hard. We can't be sure that we've won this battle till we've actually won it. Final quote, Malcolm says, my thanes and kinsmen henceforth be earls, the first that Scotland ever in such an honor named. So the term earls was an English thing. Not so, you know, throughout the play, we've had it's the thanes, the thane of Cawdor, the thane of Glamis, the thane of Fife, which is Macduff, and so on, right? But here he's saying, you're thanes for helping me kill Macbeth. I'm going to name you earls. This is an English term. So again, do you see how Shakespeare is uniting English stuff with Scottish stuff to try and convince the English public that watch this in Jacobean England that it's okay for Scotland and England to be united like this. But the other reason this is a cool quote is because this also shows that Malcolm, it foreshadows that Malcolm is going to be a rightful just king like Duncan was, because Duncan rewarded good work from his men with titles and land and rewards. He obviously rewarded Macbeth with the Thane of Cawdor. And here, the first thing we see Malcolm doing when he first becomes king is rewarding his men for their hard work in the battle. Okay, cool. So that is some good quotes, hopefully, for Malcolm for you. Now we're going to write a paragraph on Malcolm and how he's presented, why he's significant. So I think that I'm going to talk about Malcolm in terms of his deception, just because I think that's one of the most unusual terms, and how he is like a growth of Duncan. So one of the most significant ways that Malcolm is presented is as a wise leader who has learned and grown from some of the mistakes of his father. Now, I think just very quickly, I want to explain that there's AO1, which is good points and good knowledge of the text. There's AO2, which is good analysis and breaking down of language and structure. There's AO3, which is good context and how the reader, the audience would respond. And then finally, we've got AO4, which is how well the piece is written. Now, let's assume that being an English teacher for over a decade, I can do AO4 fairly well. So we're not going to focus much on how well the piece is written, but you will have that, most of you, as part of your exams. Now, these AOs might be in slightly different order depending on your exam board, but pretty much everyone will need to do all of these things, right? So what I've just done here is AO1. So I want to always start with a good, strong point. I now want to go into some evidence and some techniques and explain and break that down. So that's going to be AO2. Then I want to finish with some context and perhaps some reader response. So he's a wise leader who's learned and grown from some of the mistakes of his father. We see this in Act 4, Scene 3, when Malcolm comments, a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry God. The metaphor of himself as a lamb has connotations of weakness and naivety, which shows his wisdom, as he knows that he is vulnerable right now and will not open himself up to trusting anyone until he can be sure. In this sense, he is on a growth arc, trying to avoid the fate of his father. Furthermore, the imagery of the angry God links to the fact that Malcolm knows that he will eventually have to face a powerful enemy. In Macbeth. So this bit here that I've just done, this is AO2. So I've broken down the quote that I've picked out here. And I could go in further if I had more time. I'm sorry, I have to leave it there and just do some AO3. But we could then go about how, you know, he pretends he doesn't have any of the qualities of a king. And the irony of that, the fact that he knows about the qualities of the king, suggests he probably has some of them. But so he's deceiving, but in a positive way. Malcolm goes on to deceive Macduff in order to make sure he can trust him. As the audience, or as a Jacobean audience, we would feel that this is very admirable of Malcolm, and that he would make a good king. This is significant because the Jacobeans would have believed in the divine right of kings. So they would have believed that Malcolm's skills, leadership, came from God, and would hope that he was successful. Something like that. So that's AO3. So notice I've broken down the quote very deeply, that's AO2. And then I've gone into how the audience might have felt and why that's significant. So that's all context, how the play was produced, how the play was received. So that's AO1, 2, 3. And as I said, AO4, obviously it's written pretty well. It's organized. It's got spelling, punctuation, grammar. So there's a model paragraph for you anyway. So hopefully that helps. And I hope you learned something from that. And feel free, if you like the video, leave it a thumbs up. If you have any comments, questions, comment down below. Thanks very much.